Hello everyone, and today we're taking a look at not an HD 7770 because that cooler is still stolen off a dead card. We are taking another look at my HD 5770, which just seems to fit the cooler perfectly, and I didn't have one for this because this is one of the batch of old cards that I got sent a long time ago. And yeah, it's just kind of been sitting around since then. But since this is a Terascale 2 GPU, just like the 6850 that's gonna be on cheap-ass chips. Actually, there was a cheap-ass chip comp about this card as well, but I missed that one. But yeah, so I've been working with this to get a bit of a better idea how to work with the Terascale 2 architecture, since the 6850 was my... Well, I had this card before, but I never really worked with it before the 6850, so I consider it as my second Terascale card. But yeah, so I've modified it, as you can see. I have an oscilloscope hookup, which I think I've already shown on video, and I have a bunch of cap mods. I did take scope shots of the card in unmodded, just VRM output, and then also behind the core modding, so we can take a look at those results. They're not really that impressive yet, but you can see an improvement. And then of course I have this giant tentacle monster here, which is a volt mod for core, memory, and VDDCI on the card, which is why there's so many connectors here, because like the green one's a ground wire, then every white wire is a control wire, so here's for core, here's memory, here's VDDCI, and then all the orange or yellow ones are voltage sense, which are not really taken in a great spot. They are all taken at the VRM output itself, which is not what I would usually want to do. I would want to have the voltage at the actual, like, the back of the core, or like the furthest memory chip, which I could use either of these because the memory VRM is like right here. Yeah, I think this is fine because this card isn't particularly high power draw, so there's not gonna be as massive of a drop off of like your voltage as, for example, a GTX 480. And the biggest drop is always on the core, and on the core I have the oscilloscope hookup, so there I can see with very high accuracy exactly what's going on. So I'm fine with just reading the EVC voltage from here. And to be honest, it's like, yeah, there's not much of a drop that happens. Like if I compare the oscilloscope and the EVC, it's like maybe 10-20 millivolts difference. But yeah. So those are all the mods so far. There's a few more things that I could do. Now I could also cap mod memory and VDDCI. That is probably gonna happen, but I kinda also wanna first take some scope shots of that, just because I have never probed a one-phase VRM yet, and also not something that powers like something that's not a core. So I do wanna probe those first before I throw capacitors on that. And then there's also the PCI Express 2.0 mod. So, these Terascale 2 GPUs, depending on which platform you use them on, are potentially stuck at PCI Express 1.1. For example, on my Maximus 9 Apex, they are. And there is a mod that you can make to get around that. Because the, like I made a video about this for NVIDIA GPUs a while back. There you can get around the 1.1 glitch, or like, I don't know if it's a glitch, but like you can force them to PCI Express 2.0 by just setting 2.0 as the highest generation in BIOS. On AMD ones, this doesn't work, at least not on my Apex. On AMD boards, it seems to sometimes work, but on my Apex, it does not. But there is a mod. A actual hardware mod that you can do to the card, not the motherboard, to force the card to PCI Express 2.0, and it involves the crossfire fingers. Now on this card it's specifically annoying, which is why I haven't done the mod yet. I've done it on my 6850 already. You'll see that when I show that card next time on camera. But yeah, so essentially, I might make a dedicated video about this, but essentially, so if you have two crossfire connectors, you go to the left one. If you only have one, well then you only have one, and you go and trace out on the back side the second pin from the right. So you can see how there's like this pin, second pin from the right, and then there's a little trace going, and that goes into a via right here. That's the problem. My 6850, and it seems a lot of other cards, have an empty resistor pad or like an empty switch pad on the back side here, which this card doesn't. And that allows you to, like, you know, solder something to the trace connected to this pin, because this pin is, as far as I know, this is named GPIO2, and this sets the PCI Express interface speed. And if you pull this pin to 3.3 volts through a 10 kilo ohm pull-up resistor, this forces the I/O into 5 gigaticks per second, which is 2.0 speeds. That's how the mod works. And yeah, so like my 6850 and a lot of other cards just have an empty pad here that's connected to this pin on one side and 3.3 volts on the other side, but this one doesn't. This one just goes into a via and just kind of goes, because like, if we look at the front, I don't think there actually is anything to... I don't think there's anything either, so I'm just gonna have to like probe the PCB until I find something that's shorted to that pin, and then I can solder to that, and I really don't feel like doing that right now, especially because this card doesn't really seem to need that mod. Like, it's not like it's not, it probably helps, but like probably not enough to like really be worth it. And the washers are sticking to it. Come off. So yeah, our via was, yeah, right there. It's like below, slightly below the transistor, but that's the via. And yeah, is it connected to this thing? I might have to probe, but it might just go, it might just be an internal trace and just go somewhere where you can't see it and then come out some other place. I'm not sure. So PCI Express 2.0 mod I'm gonna have to figure out. Now you could just solder directly to the second pin on the Crossfire connector. That of course prevents you from ever running Crossfire on this card, which honestly I'm probably never gonna do, but I just don't like the idea of that solution. So if I'm ever gonna do a 2.0 mod to this, then probably gonna be, yeah, I'm just gonna have to find something that's connected to that second pin, and then pull that up to 3.3 volts to it through a 10 kilo ohm resistor. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I haven't really done any more mods to this, because like it's a bit difficult. Like, I have pretty high confidence that this can be memory timing modded because of the same architecture as the 6000 series. And the 6000 series can be memory timing modded. It's just that on this generation it seems to be a lot more undocumented, because for example GPU-Z doesn't just tell you your memory timings, which is usually how I find the straps in the BIOS. So I'm not really sure, like I guess they always start with 7771 and then a bunch of zeros, but how do I know which strap is which? And how do I know which is the Hynix and which is the Elpida strap, because they usually have two. But yeah, it's a bit problematic, but I'm fairly sure this can be memory timing modded, and since this is, you know, a sacrificial test card and not my 6850, I'm willing to experiment with this a bit if I have any idea on what to do with that. And yeah, then the sort of last little problem that I have with this is with cooling. Now, I was quite lucky that this 7770 heatsink, which I had to put together with hot glue because all the plastic things where the screws go into broke off, fits on the card, like same mounting spacing, and like clears everything. But honestly, this is not great. This is not a great heatsink. The card goes to like 60 degrees. If you might not even have to overvolt it for that, and that's like with full fan speed. So it's not specifically great. And the problem is the mounting hole spacing. This spacing is smaller than what my phase change unit supports, which makes Sub-Zero a lot more janky than any card where it does fit, because, well, if it doesn't fit the mounting holes on my phase change because the evaporator is just too big, like I'm pretty sure the evaporator at least partly covers the mounting holes here. Yeah, my only way to mount my phase change unit to this is to use clamps, which is what I've done already in the past. Like, did I do it with the... Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did it with both the NVS 300 and my HD 4550 for last year's cheapers. And while that does work, those two cards were very low power. This one is also still kinda low power, but compared to those other cards, actually not. And so if your mount is just a little bit off, on those cards it wasn't that big of an issue. On this it's gonna be a bigger issue. And just in general, the mounting is just... It's just really janky with clamps. Like, you can do it, but I once posted an image of it on I think the AHOC Discord, and yeah, a lot of people said they wouldn't be willing to do that. So yeah, I'm doing something very janky here. Now I have a water block that does fit on this, so that's not gonna be much of an issue. But I really want to do Sub-Zero. Like, my 6850, the one practice run, I did Sub-Zero with it just to make sure that it doesn't cold bug or something. That one went really well, and I already had this card spit out some amazing scores, like, because there was a cheap-ass comp with HD 5770s. This card has a bunch of very new and very good scores, and I've already managed to, like, beat a lot of them. Without, like, that was on air cooling. I had, like, one session with water cooling on this, but these nuts that I used, they are too big, and they were bending the mounting screws, so that wasn't great. But yeah, like, I've already got some really good scores with this. My efficiency, especially with AMD cards, which I got a clarification. 5000 series still says ATI on them, but officially they're AMD, and then 6000 series is like when they also officially said AMD on them, because, like, I think, as far as I know, ATI was already acquired by AMD around 5000 series, but they already were, like, in production phase, so it still said ATI on them, whatever. But yeah, so, like, my efficiency seems great, my 6850 scores are great, the scores I get from this are great. I think it's somewhat due to just my OS, because I have a very specific stripped Windows 7 ISO that only works on my Apex. I've tried to make it work on other boards, I have been unable so far. Because it's a really, really, really custom ISO, it doesn't use the same file structure as, like, any other Windows 7 ISO, which means that all the patching programs don't work with it. So I had to manually patch in drivers, and I only found the necessary files for the Apex. So, yeah. But I have a feeling that Windows I have is a large part of why my efficiency is so good. Other part might just be because I'm using the right driver. I am using the 1312 driver for this. I know for a fact that the 15.7 driver, which is the current one that AMD will tell you to download if you look for drivers for this card, that one is awful. I tested that, and, like, on the 6850 it goes from 3400 points down to 3000 points at clock for clock, and same driver settings. So yeah, I guess a lot of people just get the newest driver and assume it's the best one because fine wine, but it seems for legacy AMD that is not the case. And yeah, and there might be some other factors which I don't know, too sure. Maybe there's some secret sauce with the Apex itself. Whatever. So now I think, how long is the video? The video is 14 minutes already. So I think for now I'm gonna put the card back together and I'm gonna do some overclocking. I already kinda know where this maxes out, but I didn't spend that much time on it, so there's potentially still some headroom left. So I'm gonna put this card together, and overclock it a bit, and then I'm just gonna show you in OBS what it does, because I like the idea of that more than me just going like, oh yeah, it does this clock and about this score. So I'm actually just gonna show you, and if we still have time after that, I'll also show you the oscilloscope results. They're not that interesting, but it's kind of nice to just see the improvement. But anyway, so onto OBS. Alright, so here we are, and this is the second attempt for making this part of the video, because as always, the clock speeds that I pretest and work every time cease to function as soon as I press record. Anyway, so this right here is stock performance for the card. So this is where we're starting, except that, disclaimer, I have tessellation turned off in the driver, I have texture filtering to high performance, and I am on a Windows 7 install that in the past has performed pretty well. So if you don't have all of that, then this is probably a bit higher than what you're gonna get. But this is the card at stock clocks. Now 850 for the core and 1200 for the memory. This is quite a lot higher than stock clocks for the 6850, and also compared to where the 6850 overclocks, this is also pretty high, especially for the memory. But I suppose this is using a different core and different memory chips than the 6850, and I suppose those were slightly higher spec, because this is also what Tech Power Up says for the stock clock, so it's not like this is a factory overclocked one. But whatever. This is what it overclocks to, at least with the air cooler. I had it actually at higher clock speeds on the water cooler, but, well, I don't have the water cooler on it right now because of the mounting issues I had. But anyway, this is what I can achieve with the air cooler on it, which, to be honest, is not a great air cooler. Like, specifically this card seems to be a bit worse for temperature than the 6850, because the stock heatsink for the 6850 is basically the same as this, but this one seems more temperature sensitive. I assume because the core is smaller, but it is a different overall amount of power draw, since there's it's the same architecture and a fairly similar amount of cores in each GPU, except that this one is a lot smaller than the 6850s, so higher heat density and more affected by heat, therefore. Anyway, let's hope that this actually passes this time. It's worked every single time I pre-tested it, but when I pressed record the last two times, it always crashed. So yeah, here continues my trend of like everything works fine until you press record and then things come apart. I've opened the windows to just like cool down my room a bit, which, yeah, might be why you may be able to hear cars in the background. Anyway, here goes GT1. The card will artifact quite heavily, at least in well, not right now. There's a bit of artifacting. Yeah, it tends to just like lose 3D display output. Like everything 2D will stay on screen, but everything 3D just cuts out at some point. That's not the card crashing. The card only crashes when the FPS counter also stops, or when you can't see it right now. But I have, yeah, there's the screen gone. But I have the oscilloscope hooked up to the card in roll mode, so as soon as I see the transient waveform disappearing, I will know that the card has crashed, because that's easier to look at than the FPS counter, to be honest. But yeah, that's the only thing I use the oscilloscope for right now, which is why it's not in OBS. It's not really important to look at. But yeah, so GT2, this one changes quite a lot how heavily it artifacts. Like right now it's not too bad. Sometimes it just puts confetti all over your screen. Sometimes there's also a lot of geometry errors, which I can't see any of right now. Oh, actually there's a couple. Yeah, a couple smaller ones. And I just hope that this is not going to crash now, because I really want to make this video, like, I want to be done with it. It's already long enough as it is. And okay, that's GT2 done. Now it just doesn't, now it just has to not crash in combined. Yeah, by the way, if like, this is the CPU test on my 8700K at 5.3 gigahertz and 1.44 volts or something like that, and it's only drawing like 150 watt. I was surprised like how little power this chip actually pulls. Like, I mean, Firestrike CPU test is not the heaviest, but like even TimeSpy only pulls like 180. And even Prime 95 is like, I think only like 100, 200. Like, that also explains why the CPU never climbs over 70 degrees, because it's delivered with liquid metal. It's interesting also to see how this card draws more power from the 6-pin than the 6850, despite the 6850 having more, like more cores and a bigger memory bus. But I think it's mostly due to that this card. It's an okay score. I've seen 2800 at these clock speeds before, but I guess I'll take that. So, you know. But yeah, anyway, like I think this card draws more power because it has the VCore VRM on the right side, which makes it more convenient to hook up to the 6-pin, whereas the 6850 has it on the left side, which makes it more convenient to hook up to PCIe. So, yeah, anyway. But coming back to this card, yeah, I mean, that's a decent increase from stock clocks for the clock speed that we got, and still haven't done memory timing mods. Card is also still stuck at PCIe 1.1, like I said. Like, this does not go to 2.0. I need to hard mod this. And yeah, I could do more cap mods. I could, of course, throw better cooling at it. Is there any more software tweaks I could do? Probably not. I did already check, like, for drivers. This is... Well, it says 13.251, but the actual driver is, like, legacy driver 13-12. So that's the driver that I found to be the best one. Yeah. And, yeah, like, the problem being that you can't really find this on AMD's website anymore. So I think Guru 3D has an archive of drivers where you can find this. Because the current driver that AMD will give you is 15-7, and 15-7 is really bad. On my 6850, it deletes about 400 points of the score. Scaled down to this card, that's probably in the range of 250 to 300 points that it just deletes off your score. So you yeah, like 13-12 and then also 13-1 are like the drivers that worked best for me. Anything that's older, I think just didn't install, because, you know, AMD, ATI and AMD legacy drivers, 9 out of 10 times you install them and it tells you to restart and you restart and then there's just no driver. That's my experience. Like, I'm glad that this specific Windows 7 ISO also works pretty well with those drivers, because it is an absolute pain on any other that I've tried. So, yeah. But I think the video is long enough now, and I think the car sounds are also getting quite annoying. So, yeah, like this is overclocking so far with like air cooler, which is probably, I mean, I actually know what heatsink was on this card, but it just feels like an appropriate heatsink for what these would probably ship with. So I'm gonna call the stock heatsink performance, like you can see 67 degrees up to at full fan speed. It's not too great. But anyway, yeah, so that's gonna be the video. Probably not gonna do the oscilloscope shots because it's already long enough. So I'll save that for another video. And until then, goodbye.